As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded. Thank you to those of you who signed up, but we do realize you have busy schedules, and Vanessa is going to touch on a lot of valuable subjects today, so you will likely want to revisit the content. You can find this posted at the Emory University YouTube channel, specifically in the Career Webinars playlist. I will be sending out an email to all registrants with information on Vanessa's website, which I've also sent out in the chat area, a handout that you can follow along with in the handout area of the control panel, and a link to the recording of the webinar, so you can find all that information later. And we appreciate all of those questions that were sent in advance of today's session, but we will be leaving time for questions the last 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the presentation, so feel free to submit some questions there, and we'll also try and get to the ones that were sent in advance in as many as time allows. For more information on upcoming events, you can visit alumni.emory.edu/career, and again, I'll send out information on many of our upcoming events we have going on. But before I turn it over to Vanessa, I just want to tell you a little bit more about her background. Vanessa Van Edwards is a published author and behavioral investigator. She is a professional people watcher, speaking, researching, and cracking the code of interesting human behavior for audiences around the world. Vanessa's groundbreaking workshops and courses teach individuals how to succeed in business and life by understanding the hidden dynamics of people. Vanessa is a Huffington Post columnist and Penguin author. She will also be coming out with a book later this year, so we'll be sure to keep you updated on that. And Vanessa has been featured on NPR, The Wall Street Journal, The Today Show, and USA Today. She has also written for CNN, Fast Company, and Forbes. Vanessa speaks to groups across the globe, from the stage at the Consumer Electronics Show to presenting research at MIT, and she used her research to consult for numerous Fortune 500 companies, including American Express, Clean and Clear, and Cimatech. So we are thrilled to have her here sharing information with fellow Emory alums today. Vanessa graduated magna cum laude from Emory in 2007 and is SETT certified with Dr. Paul Ekman, SUBX certified with Dr. David Matsumoto, and is a member of the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners and certified in statement analysis. So Vanessa, thanks for being here. I'll now turn it over to you.
Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to speak to fellow Emory alums on one of my favorite topics. So as Sarah so kindly mentioned, I love looking at what makes people tick, and leadership is a topic that has always fascinated me ever since student council elections happened in 6th grade all the way through. I was on Emory's SPC council, and we brought in all kinds of speakers, and it was amazing to see what the patterns were of which speakers hit and people loved them and which speakers didn't do so well. And so I think it has to do with this big question: are leaders born or made? And when we think about leaders of our time or previous in our history, we often think about what makes a leader. So I love to look at the science part of this question. I'm a total research geek. I'm going to be talking about a lot of research today, where I want to know, what does the science have to say? So let's start there. And specifically, this is a study that was done by Pierre Balthazard. He wanted to know, do leaders think differently? So he developed a very, very clever study, which what he did first, he got over 1,000 leaders, and these were both military and civilian leaders across 19 different industries. So all different kinds of leadership environments, from creative to military to industry to manufacturing. And what he did is he brought them into his lab, and he had them ranked for leadership qualities. And to do this, he sent out surveys to their peers, their subordinates, their superiors, trying to get a really good picture of this individual's social perceptions, how people perceive them. And leadership qualities are things like competence, power, charisma, empathy, warmth. So he had them ranked by all these different people in different areas of their life. Then he scanned their brains. He wanted to see how they think, what kind of specific brain patterns they make when looking at pictures, when faced with problems, when chatting. What he found was, and this blows my mind, that the top leaders, the leaders who had the highest ranking in leadership qualities by their peers and subordinates, had very distinct brain patterns. They were so distinct that him and his researchers could look at a brain scan and tell you with 92% accuracy how they would rank on that leadership exam. So he could look at a scan of my brain or your brain and tell you if your peers or subordinates with 92% accuracy see you as a leader. Now, this sort of caused ripples, this study, in the academic world. And the reason for that is because it brings up this huge question of the physiology of leadership, that maybe there is actually a way that leaders think. And if this is the case, can we learn it? And the good news is that these specific patterns are actually quite identifiable. We can see what areas are more active in a leader's brain, and then we can actually change it. Our brain is very much like a muscle, just like a bicep or a tricep. Please excuse my cheesy stock image. Very much like a bicep or a tricep. You know, you go into the gym and you're doing bicep curls, and eventually you get that nice muscle. The brain is very similar in that even if you're not used to thinking a certain way, training your brain to think a certain way can actually build up those synapses very much like a bicep or a tricep. And I wanted to show you a very quick study because most people don't believe me when I tell them they can change their brain, that leaders don't just have to be born, they can also be made. You can train your brain to think more like a leader. This is how easily and how quickly this can happen. So these are actually brain scans from Dr. Daniel Amen. Dr. Amen runs a brain clinic in California. So this is a scan of a healthy brain. As you can see, there's a pretty whole activity all over the brain. Whereas, comparatively, this is a scan of a drug-affected brain, where you can see that there are huge holes and gaps in activity, not fully formed, not fully shaped, lots of missing areas of activity. This is an Alzheimer's brain. So an Alzheimer's brain has even more huge gaps in activity where there is just a loss of any kind of synapse activity in that area. This is a scan of former NFL player Duval Love's brain. So you can see there's huge gaps here in activity from all of his concussions, all of his head injuries, where it's very different than a healthy brain scan. What Dr. Amen did is he looked at these scans and he said, okay, this specific area in the left temporal lobe, I see no activity there. I'm going to design activities for you that specifically exercise the left temporal lobe. And he did this, like he developed a brain exercise plan for Duval Love, and 3 months later, this was his brain, which is incredible, that only 3 months later, he can almost have back to healthy brain activity. What we are doing today is I have developed a brain exercise program in leadership. So the specific areas of the brain that Pierre Balthazar found leaders have high activity in, that is where I want to focus today. I want to train your brain to think more like a leader. And a lot of that comes down to I only have an hour. This is actually a full day-long corporate workshop that I do that I've smushed into about 45 minutes, so I've taken sort of the best parts of it. Today I want to focus on one of those patterns, which has to do with charisma. So charisma is this very interesting word. So I run a human behavior research lab in Portland, Oregon, and what we do is we bring people into our lab and we test them on all kinds of very inappropriately personal things that they don't like to share with us, and we try to see if we can find patterns. One of the things that we accidentally stumbled upon was the science of charisma. What happened was I brought people into the lab. We were actually doing personality testing in this particular experiment. We brought people into the lab and I asked them 2 of the questions on this experiment. One of them was, who is the most charismatic person you know? And what we found was that instantly, very quickly, people could tell you, oh yeah, I know the most charismatic person I know. It's my dad, it's my brother, my teacher, my role model. They could instantly tell you who the most charismatic person they know was. The very next question was, what is charisma? And it was so interesting because we watched person after person completely struggle with this second question, where they would say, well, you know, charisma is that thing that's like, you know, it's that feeling that you get. It's, you know, it's charisma. And even though they could tell us the person in their life who was very charismatic, they had a really hard time defining the word. And so we realized that there is this there's a gap here in what it is in actuality and how we define it. So what we did is we brought in as many of those highly charismatic people as we could find, and we tested them on everything we could think of, all different kinds of tests, trying to figure out Why have people rated these people as very highly charismatic? What is charisma? And when we look at what we found with the academic studies, we found that charisma is actually the perfect blend of two personality traits or two qualities, warmth and competence. And they actually have to be perfectly balanced, high in both. Because if someone is just warm, they are rated as very friendly, very sweet, very compassionate, not very smart, not very impressive, not very powerful. And if someone is just rated as highly competent, they're seen as very smart, very dependable, powerful, important, but a little intimidating, hard to talk to, not a good team player. The very highly charismatic people hit this sort of sweet spot in between both warmth and competence. And this is also very, very powerful leaders. The way that they think is with that friendly, collaborative spirit with a strong amount of respect and power. So I want you to look at this spectrum that I've created. I call it the charisma spectrum. And I want you to place yourself on it. So I want you to think about, where do you fall on the spectrum? Are you a little higher on the warm side? Do people see you as really friendly, really easy to talk to, but maybe they don't take your ideas as seriously, or they interrupt you a lot? Or are you a little higher on the competent side, where you're seen as very strong, very powerful, but people say that you're intimidating or that you're hard to communicate with? I want you to place yourself on it, because that is exactly where I want you to focus. If you're high on the charisma side, on the competent side, I want to teach you some warmth qualities. And if you're high on the warmth side, I want to teach you some competence qualities to move you a little bit closer to the center. Now, today I had to focus specifically on nonverbal, and the reason for that is because we didn't have time to do both verbal and nonverbal, and also this is, I think, the more interesting side of leadership science. So research has found that at least, a minimum, 60% of our communication is nonverbal. Some studies by Albert Moravian find it up to 93%, but that's very rare situations that it would be 93%. But still, most of our communications are 60% nonverbal. The problem is most of us, when we're thinking about an interview or a pitch or a negotiation, we're usually thinking about the words we want to say, what we want to tell someone. We very rarely think about how we want to say something. So today I want to focus more on the how. Leaders, those distinct brain patterns, they're very, very good at both encoding and decoding. The brain patterns for leaders in nonverbal intelligence were through the roof. Not only were they good at decoding nonverbal signs, reading people's body language and facial expressions, but they were also very good at encoding their own nonverbal signs. Encoding is how you send messages from your own body. So they were very good at saying, you know what, today I want to come across competent in giving a pitch. And they knew exactly what to do with their body to be able to encode that message. So today I'm going to be focusing on decoding and encoding for both warmth and competence, depending on what side of the spectrum you need to move to. Very first, we have to talk about trust. So trust is a huge part of the encoding process for leaders. And one of the things that we found in our lab is that when we looked at traditional studies, that a lot of them weren't applicable in the real world. So we decided to develop a really big research experiment on TED. So I'm a huge TED junkie. I love watching TED Talks. I watch one almost every day at lunch. And I wanted to figure out if there was patterns with the most popular TED Talks. Specifically, I had gone on TED.com and I had searched leadership in the search bar. And two talks came up. One had over 40 million views and one had under 20,000. I looked at these two talks and I thought, these are so similar. They're both by highly regarded, respected authors. They both have very similar topics. I think the title was, you know, how to be a leader in your life. And the second talk was how to embrace your inner leadership. I mean, very incredibly similar topics. Both were good talks. And lastly, both of them were 18 minutes in length, and they came out the same month of the same year, September of 2009. I looked at these talks and I'm like, why? Why is it that one talk went viral and one talk didn't? So we decided to develop an experiment in our lab where we looked at the most popular TED Talks and the least popular TED Talks. So we took all of the talks from 2010 and we picked out the most popular ones, the 50 most popular ones, and the 50 least popular ones. And we started to code them for patterns. So we have all of our coders in our labs watch these talks looking for differences in body language, differences in vocal patterns. And we also had participants in our lab. And if you feel like playing around in our lab, please go take our latest experiment. We had participants rate these speakers on charisma, intelligence, credibility. So we took those ratings that participants gave those talks, and we compared them to the patterns that our researchers had coded. And the biggest difference, we found a couple of differences, and we were able to publish those in Huffington Post and actually for TED, the TED blog. One of the biggest differences was in hand gestures. We found the most popular TED Talks had an average of 465 hand gestures in just 18 minutes. It's a lot of hand gestures, 465 hand gestures, and our wonderful coders painstakingly counted every single one. The least popular TED Talkers had an average of 272 hand gestures in their talk, so almost half. What was going on here? Why was it that somehow hand gestures led the most popular TED Talkers to go viral? When you look in the academic research, this actually makes a lot of sense. Our hands are our trust indicators. In other words, when we first meet someone, we very quickly first glance at their hands. We usually actually don't look at the face or eyes first. We very typically look at someone's hands first. The reason for this is because our hands are our most dangerous weapons. Right? If a stranger approaches us, we want to know, are they going to reach out and shake our hand? Are they going to give us a high five? Are they going to reach out and attack us? Are they carrying a weapon? And so our brains, from a survival standpoint, have adapted to look at hands first and to know that our hands are important. For example, the TED Talkers who came out on stage and had their hands hidden, either behind their back or in their pockets, something very funny happened in the audience where you actually felt a little bit uneasy. You were like, what is this person hiding? What are they going to say to us? And that's part of that survival mechanism that went, we want to see someone's hands. So when a TED Talker came out and went, hello, how are you? It was like the brain went, we love it. We can see their hands. We can trust them. Another study actually found, I love this one, I do a lot of training with lawyers. They found that when defendants put their hands underneath the table during a trial, jurors rate those defendants as more sneaky, untrustworthy, and deceitful. This is terrible news. We do not want our jurors rating defendants or subconsciously affecting their ratings based on if they can see someone's hands or not. But this is a subconscious adaptation that we have developed, that if we can't see someone's hands, there's something about them we do not trust. Luckily, this is very easy for us to understand, that keeping your hands both visible and expressive is actually one of the easiest ways you can make a very strong first impression to indicate trust. This is a great warmth indicator. If you are very high on the competence side and you want more warmth, this is where I want you to focus first. Visible, we know. Visible, above the desk, so not having your hands in your lap or behind your purse or behind your back or in pockets, as well as using your hands to explain your gestures. The very, very best TED Talkers, the very best ones, typically get on stage and do the exact same thing. They go like this. Today I want to talk to you about a big idea. I'm going to break it down into 3 different areas. And I'm going to tell you how I can change your life. Does that look familiar? It should. That's because most very popular TED Talks start that way. The reason for that is because our brain loves pictures, and our hands are ways to visibly demonstrate our concepts. So the most charismatic speakers and leaders, they'll say to you, I have a big idea. I have 2 different problems, and we're going to find a way to combine them. I'm going to tell you the step-by-step method to change your life. We're going to move from the left to the right, or for you, from the left to the right. You'll even notice, it's a big year for me on the campaign trail, so I analyze all the different politicians for the Huffington Post, and it's been fascinating this year. It's been a very contentious year, and you'll notice that some of the candidates have very interesting hand gestures. They have been coached to use their hand gestures in very specific ways. For example, you might even see a candidate say, the bad guys over here, these are the bad guys, my competitors, but the good guys over here, they're doing all these good things. So these bad guys, they think this. And in that way, they actually trigger you to think that the bad guys are over here. And anytime he or she mentions something bad, they actually use that hand gesture to trigger, oh, bad. And anytime that he or she wants to mention something good, they talk about this little area over here. It's a very interesting way that our brain anchors with hand gestures to visibly demonstrate our words. So I want you to start thinking about how can you explain your concepts, especially if you're in a highly technical field. I work with a lot of IT departments. IT people typically have a very hard time expressing their ideas to marketing and sales and HR. And so being able to say, you know, okay, we have a very small thing we have to work on first, but let me tell you about steps 1, 2, and 3 first. Even just doing that can help break down a complex topic into very basic ideas. The other aspect of hand gestures here is that when we touch, we typically release a very small chemical called oxytocin the moment we touch someone. And oxytocin is a chemical for bonding. So not only are our hands important for explanation, they're also important to create that chemical physical bond. I have a very funny video. I hope it will show up. I know it's a little bit delayed, but I'm going to play it for you to show the universality importance of getting that oxytocin. So this video is painful to watch, no matter where you're from. That's because we hate to be denied a hand gesture, and the reason for that is because every time we shake hands or high five or hug, we release oxytocin. And oxytocin is a warm and fuzzy feeling that makes us feel connected. And so not only are visible hands important, but that handshake is incredibly important. And we know that handshakes are important, but I want to add one extra thing for you to think about. First, women typically forego the handshake, especially upon second and third meetings. I want you to try to get in the habit of not only shaking hands upon first meeting someone, but also shaking hands every time you see them. So every time you start a meeting, hey, how are you? Good to see you. Every time you see them in a networking event, hey, good to see you. And also ending on a handshake. Ending your meeting with that nice, solid burst of oxytocin. So getting up, standing up, and saying, it was so great talking to you. It was so great seeing you. Can't wait to see you next time. Get in the habit of sealing in that connection with both the start of a handshake and the end on a handshake. A hug is also good if you have a more intimate work environment. That's okay as well. Let's talk about the next topic, which is vocal power. So the other thing that we found with those TED Talks was that leaders have a very specific kind of vocal pattern or vocal cadence. And this is backed up in the academic research as well. So this is my favorite study that I'm going to talk about today. It's done with doctors. So what they did is researchers had doctors record 10-second voice tone clips. So the doctors, they would take their microphone and they would say, hello, my name is Dr. Edwards and I work at Children's Presbyterian Hospital and I specialize in oncology. Very short clip, name, where they worked, and their specialty. They took these 10-second clips and they warbled the words. So they made the words so that you couldn't understand what the doctor was actually saying, but the volume, the pace, the cadence was the same. So it sounded like this. Right? So you could hear it, but you couldn't understand it. Then they asked participants to rate these clips for leadership qualities, specifically warmth and competence. Now just imagine this for a second. Imagine you're given a clip of gobbledygook and asked, how smart is this person? How friendly is this person? It's a very hard thing to do, actually, because you're hearing blah, 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 but you're supposed to rate them. Even though it sounds hard, it's actually easier to do than you would think. We make very, very quick first impressions based on vocal power. At the end of this experiment, they looked at all the ratings, and they found that the doctors who got rated the lowest in warmth and competence also had the highest rate of malpractice lawsuits. Now, this is a terrifying finding. This means that we don't sue doctors based on their skills. We sue doctors based on our perception of their skills. So when we first meet someone and they say on their phone, hello, that hello is actually a first impression where we decide just based on those first few words, do we like you? Do we trust you? Do we think you're a leader? So the question is, how do you make sure that your hello when you answer the phone as well as the hello when you first meet someone and put out your hand, how do you make sure that those rank for high in warmth and competence? So there's a couple different things they found, but the two easiest ones I want to teach you right now. The first one is that the doctors that rated the highest in competence had the lowest end, used the lowest end of their natural tone. Now, I don't mean lowest of the low, so I don't mean that the lowest voice tone did the best. What I mean is that whether male or female, the doctors who used the lowest end of their natural tone did better. For example, all of us have a certain range of voice tone. Right now, I am working very hard to keep my voice in the lowest end of my range. When I get excited, my voice tends to go a little bit higher and I start to speak a little bit more like this. This is the higher end of my natural range. Now, if I were to present to you like this, it would drive you absolutely crazy and you would not want to listen to me. So I'm working hard to bring my voice tone back down to my lower end of my range. And that is because our ears love to hear that. This, with my voice tone, is much easier to hear than this, which is much harder to hear, which we don't like as much. The way that we control this is by understanding our nervousness. So the reason why our voice goes up is because our vocal cords will tense when we're talking. So when I get excited or when I get nervous, my vocal cords get really tense and I go really high in my natural range. And that's how I get more vocal fry. Vocal fry, so vocal fry is when your vocal cords are tense. Let's see if I can do it for you. So when your vocal cords are a little bit tense and you tend to lose a little bit of that voice so that your voice crackles a little bit. That's because my voice, I was tensing my vocal cords for you. So it is impossible for our vocal cords to stay tense when we are breathing out. So for example, every time during this webinar that I've heard my voice go a little bit higher into my natural range, I take in a deep breath and I speak on the out breath. So for example, if I start to hear myself go a little bit higher, I take in a deep breath and then I speak on the out breath by forcing my air out on each breath. That actually forces my vocal cords to relax. So hopefully you're at your desk or you're at home. If you can, if you're able to speak out loud, I want you to try, take a couple deep breaths with me. And then I want you to say hello on the out breath. That is the lowest end of your natural range. So if you go hello, that hello is the deepest end of your natural range. Most people, when they pick up the phone, they're nervous or they're excited. They say, hello? And they're in the highest end of their natural range. What I want you to practice doing is actually taking a deep breath in and then going, hello? That's a much deeper end of your range. So breathing out when you hear yourself go up in that range. I hope this video comes through. So this is a video of Margaret Thatcher. And Margaret Thatcher had a very lilting voice when she first started out in politics. She would sort of speak in this a bit sing-songy, where it was very melodic and very high, a little bit higher in her natural range. Now, when people speak like that, when I speak like that, it sounds pleasant, but you don't really pay attention to the words I'm using. So Laurence Olivier, the famous actor, trained her to lower her natural range so that she spoke in a more competent lower tone. So I want to show you a clip of two different voice tones. One of her speaking high in that kind of lilting tone of voice, and one of her speaking very purposefully. I want you to hear the difference.
I've been so busy that I haven't had really much time to think about it. After all, I know I'm still only me, and so do my family. But I'm very much aware of the responsibilities and a little bit apprehensive. Who wouldn't be when you think of the names that I follow? Let me answer that very deeply, because I feel very strongly about it. The greatest divisions this nation has ever seen were the conflicts of trade unions towards the end of a Labour government.
So you don't even know what she's saying in this clip, but boy, oh boy, does that second one sound important. And the reason for that is because she's actually cueing you as a leader that when she is speaking in a very dominant, low voice tone, it's a cue to say, I better listen. And that is because when we hear nice, relaxed voice tone, we go, they must be relaxed, they must be confident and competent. So you'll notice that a lot of politicians, The politicians, for example, that have really high popularity ratings, they do what's called the authoritative voice tone. And this is the second thing that I want to teach you. So there are two different kinds of inflections. One is the question inflection when we go up at the end of our sentences, and the other is the authoritative voice tone. So the question inflection is when we ask instead of say our statements. So for example, I could say, my name is Vanessa, right? So that goes up at the end. My name is Vanessa. I went to Emory. That is, I'm asking you my name and I'm asking you where I went to school. That indicates very low confidence. So the doctors who use the question inflection were related low in competence. Their clips sounded more like this. My name is Vanessa and I work at Children's Presbyterian and I specialize in oncology. Right? So it went up at the end of their sentences. Whereas the doctors who were rated very high in competence used what's called the authoritative voice tone. So this is when they used a lower tone and they went down at the end of their phrases. So this sounds more like this. My name is Vanessa. I went to Emory and I studied human behavior. Right? So I went down into my sentences. You'll notice that politicians who really are these captivating leaders, they tend to sling down their words at the end of their sentences. Actually, Obama is very good at doing this. So you'll notice President Obama has this way of speaking where it's very authoritative. So he sounds a little bit like this. See, I'm not very good at impressions, but you can kind of hear it. So he goes, today we have a problem in our country. If we don't deal with this problem, then we are going to have major problems for the future, right? It's a very slinging down kind of way of speaking, and that cues our brain to say, leader, competent, whereas if politicians who are speaking get very anxious or nervous or excited, even when they're excited and passionate, and they go up into that shrill or vocal fry kind of voice tone, our brain's like, ooh, not a leader. We don't like it, and we tend to tune them out, or they tend to irritate us or bother us. So this voice tone is incredibly important for our first impression, as well as getting people to pay attention to us. A couple phone tips for you if you're on the phone a lot. This is for phone or public speaking. Always breathe out on hello to make sure you keep your vocal cords relaxed, as I mentioned. This is one of the harder things I'm going to recommend, but I do strongly recommend it. Next time you're on a phone call with an important client, I highly recommend that you record the conversation, just your end, and listen to every time you use the question inflection, so at the end of your sentences, and or your voice goes into vocal fry, to identify those areas that are a little bit, I would say, high nerves. And lastly, if you have hard news to deliver or timelines to deliver, practice delivering that news with the authoritative voice tone. For example, I work with a lot of sales groups and who are people who are on the phone doing sales calls all day long. The biggest mistake that salespeople make is they have a really solid pitch, and then the moment they get to their price, they use the question inflection. So it sounds like this. We'd love to have your business. We think that you'd be a great fit for our company, and the starting price is only $5,000. The problem is when you do that, you are begging people to negotiate with you. You are begging them to negotiate with you. So make sure that you're practicing that timeline or price with the authoritative voice tone going down at the end so that you're saying your price, you're not asking it. So make sure that you practice. All right, let's move right along so we make sure we have enough time. So whenever I tell people that I talk about eye contact, they usually tell me, oh yes, I know body language, eye contact, good handshake. The good eye contact is complicated than we think. First of all, in the U.S., and this is U.S.-based cultures, the average amount of eye contact in a conversation is between 60 to 70%. Above 70% is considered invasive or creepy, and below 60% is considered evasive or avoidant. It's considered a lying red flag. Now, I teach human lie detection. We do a lot of human lie detection in our lab. Avoidant eye contact is actually not a sign of lying. That's just a common myth. Typically, liars actually look you in the eye more, above 90%, because they want to see if you believe them as they're lying to you. So actually, that's a total myth, but people typically associate shifty gaze with lying. So it's very, very important that you hit that sweet spot of 60 to 70%. And the reason for this also is because every time that you make eye contact, you release oxytocin, just like with a handshake. So our bodies are this amazing feedback loop of connection where we meet someone, we shake hands with them, our bodies go, whew, oxytocin, I should want to connect with them. And we're making eye contact as we're talking, and our bodies continue to produce the exact hormone we need to connect with them. So oxytocin is a huge, huge part of that secondary connection, 70%, but you don't want to go over 70%. For those of you, my MBAs who went to Emory, I know that a lot of you, at least a lot of my MBA friends when I went to Emory, were taught make eye contact when you're networking. And so have you ever been with someone and all of a sudden they're like making intense eye contact with you as you're talking and all you want to do is just back up? Too much eye contact can have the opposite effect. So don't bore into them with your eyes. Just notice their eye color, glance at them when they're speaking. That's going to produce the most oxytocin. I'm actually going to skip that section to make sure that we have enough time because I really want to hit the last two, which is micro-expressions. So the second question I usually get about eye contact is, where do I look? Right? We talked about how we kind of glance at the hands subconsciously, but where do you look on someone's face and what do you look for? So micro-expressions are very brief, universal facial expressions. If anyone's seen the show Lie to Me on Netflix, it's a great show. Highly recommend it. It's about a human lie detector. It's actually based on a real-life man. His name is Dr. Paul Ekman. He's who trained me. He discovered that there are 7 universal facial expressions across cultures, across genders, across races. And of these 7, I've narrowed down a couple that I want to teach you right now because they're the ones that come up the most in leadership and in business. And for leaders who are very good at decoding nonverbal, they have to know how to read microexpressions. We'll start with the easiest one. Easiest one is happiness. So most people actually think that happiness is just a smile. But anyone who has a mother-in-law knows that you can easily have a fake smile on your face, but not actually mean it, right? The fake smile looks like this. Yeah, I'm so happy for you. Anyone can fake smile. The only true indicator of happiness is when the crow's feet, these muscles up here, are activated. So a real smile reaches all the way up into these side muscles, and a fake smile stays in the bottom half of the face. We are very attuned to this, actually. In fact, celebrities who smile with their whole face, they haven't Botoxed that part of their face, we see them as really authentic. We love watching them on camera. They're the girls next door. Whereas celebrities or politicians who have Botoxed that part of their face, they come across to us as a little irritating, as a little fake, a little inauthentic. We do not like looking at people who are fake smiling. So what you're actually looking for is to make sure that when you're giving someone good news, a friend or a colleague, that what you're seeing is genuine happiness. They're taking that smile and they are reaching it all the way up in the upper part of their face. Remember, only 1 in 10 people can consciously activate these muscles. If you want to feel what it feels like, by the way, you can take a pen, put it between your teeth, and try to raise your cheeks as far as possible. That is how you can consciously activate what that feels like. Only 1 in 10 people can do that. So when you see that activated, you almost always know it's real. Second microexpression I want to teach you is fear. So fear is when we raise our eyelids up, so the whites of our eyes are showing, our eyebrows raise up our forehead, and our mouth opens. Now, the reason why this one is important is because leaders are extremely good at spotting and addressing nervousness. They can read an audience from stage, look at someone they're speaking with, speak to a colleague and say, hey, is everything okay? Anything make you nervous? That not only makes them more empathetic, but it also helps them from preventing miscommunications. So if they are immediately able to spot that fear and address it, they're able to tackle any hesitations, any problems before they actually arrive. That's typically what makes a leader very, very good at communications. They're able to spot hidden emotions before they arise. So when you see anyone raise their eyebrows, up their forehead or the whites of their eyes, you want to immediately address it and figure out what is that fear that you're seeing. Now, I know this is a very, very fast tutorial of the microexpressions. Usually I spend about an hour on them. So I have a full tutorial on my website that you can check out. I put the link in your handout. If you want to learn all 7 microexpressions slower, I have that all up for free on my website because I think this is like a secret superpower. A quick example for you here. I want you to watch this baby and see if you can spot the 2 microexpressions we just learned. There's that fear. So that video is a very quick video just to show you that we go from very quick expressions to the next, and they happen from birth. We are born with the ability to make these facial expressions. Even congenitally blind babies, babies who've been blind since birth, make the same facial expressions at the same time as seeing children. So it's a very, very powerful skill. All right, before I teach you this next microexpression, I'm curious to see if you can guess it right. So most people get this one wrong. This microexpression doesn't mean confusion, contempt, sarcasm, or boredom. So if you guessed contempt, you would be right. So most people think that a smirk or a one-sided mouth raise means half happiness or everything's okay. But actually that couldn't be further from the truth. Contempt is a very, very dangerous emotion. And when we see it, we have to make sure that we pay attention to it. There was actually a research study that was done by Dr. John Gottman, and he wanted to analyze married couples. So he tested married couples on everything he could think of: personality tests, IQ tests, body language tests. He filmed them in his lab in a bed and breakfast, and he found that all the couples at the end of this experiment showed a simple pattern for which couples would get divorced and which couples would stay together. And he followed these couples for 30 years. So after 30 years, he could predict with 93.6% accuracy which couples would get divorced and which couples wouldn't, simply based on this microexpression. When a couple showed contempt, one member of the couple showed contempt in their initial intake interview, with 93.6% accuracy, that couple would get divorced within 30 years. This finding is obscene. Like, we don't even see numbers like that in science very often. 93.6%, ridiculous. We never get accuracy like that in science. That is because contempt is an incredibly powerful emotion. So when it sits there on your colleague's face, on your partner's face, and I know this is not doing love and dating webinars, anyone that we're with, we don't want them to show contempt. The moment they show contempt, you want to figure out what is going on. How can you pursue more information? Where is it coming from? Reviewing shared interests, saying, hey, like, let's work this out. I want what you want. I know how frustrating this is, but I want to work with you together, and then going into rapport building. Because if you don't, the reason why Dr. John Gottman thinks that contempt destroys marriages is because it is the only emotion that doesn't go away. Surprise, happiness, fear, it comes in a burst and it fades, but not contempt. Contempt sits and it festers. Unless it's addressed, it sits and it grows into resentment, and then disrespect, and then hatred. And so with your partners and your colleagues and people around you, true leaders, watch for this microexpression and then figure out exactly how they can fix it. That is the perfect combination of warmth, having empathy, and competence, making sure that you're addressing needs and you're doing it very quickly and very effectively. So those are the 3 microexpressions that I wanted you to learn. There are 7 total. I think those are the ones that you see most often, especially that help with leadership. And there's one last thing I want to teach you before we go into Q&A, and this is a very simple little trick. It's called the triple nod. So research has found that a slow triple nod, 1, 2, 3, when you do that, the other person speaks 3 or 4 times longer. And that is because it is the ultimate warmth cue. It's kind of like a nonverbal ... right? So if I say to someone, I'm saying, yes, please keep going, tell me more. So it's a lovely nonverbal way to show that you're listening. So you can do this with colleagues, you can do this with partners, with bosses. It really helps people feel like they can open up to you, and that's exactly what you want. You want them to be able to feel like they can trust and be open-minded with you. Side note here is you can also add a slow head tilt. The head tilt is a very engaging move. It also shows that you're listening, and so if you have bad news to deliver, that slight head tilt and triple nod can also help soften the news non-verbally in addition to verbally. Always be careful. Body language falls on a spectrum. We're talking about the slow triple nod. Too much nodding is considered bobbleheading, right? And that just shows impatience. So it's the slow, purposeful triple nod that we're going for in that sweet spot. So let's review really quickly. So if you fall high on the competent side and you want more warmth, I want you to focus on these 3 cues we just learned. Social gazing, keeping your hands visible and explanatory, and using the head tilt or the triple nod. If you fall high on the competent side, if you fall high on the warmth side and you want to be seen as more competent, you want to use more power gazing, so more direct eye contact. You want to also read microexpressions. So you want to make sure that you're tapping into exactly what the hidden emotion is that you're seeing. And lastly, you also want to use vocal power, the lower end of your natural tone, as well as that authoritative voice tone. Here's some next steps for you. I know I packed a lot into this 45 minutes. Try to tackle one skill at a time. So I know that it can be overwhelming to do all of them at once. If you end up doing all of them at once, you end up like a body language Frankenstein, where you're like hands, vocal power, eye gazing, microexpressions. It's too much for your brain to do. So one at a time, I would recommend doing 1 a week until you get that nice muscle memory where it begins to feel more natural. Second, I have tons of practice. I did not get to put in a lot of my practice videos for microexpressions or vocal power. I have tons of them on my YouTube channel and on my website. This work completely changed my life. I love learning about the science of human behavior, and so I put it all on my website for free because I hope that it will change yours as well. And the last thing that I want to teach is all of these leadership powers. Please use them for good. Use your influence for good and not evil. So I know that we have a couple of questions. We had some before we even started. I'm happy to take some of the live questions, or I tried to answer a couple of the pre-questions also while I was teaching, so hopefully that helps. Sarah, if you want to let me know what they've got.
Yes, absolutely. So thank you so much, Vanessa, for all that great information. And yes, I encourage everyone to take a moment and type in anything you would like to ask. But Vanessa, first, how does an introvert or extrovert play into these leadership skills, and what specifically introverts work on?
Yeah, so great question. So I actually find introversion and extroversion fascinating because it's one of the big 5 personality traits. So when we talk about personality, there's all these sort of myths out there. There's a lot of tests, you know, Myers-Briggs and DISC and colors and Enneagram. The only personality measurement that is accurate in academia, that is used in academia, that has solid, replicable results is called the Big 5. So the Big 5, it's 5 personality traits. They are openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So extroversion is a big one of those personality traits. We also have a free personality quiz on our website if you want to kind of play around with what you are on those 5 traits. Extroversion is interesting because there's actually a 3rd trait there, which is called ambiversion. So ambivert is someone who is situationally extroverted or introverted. Most people, by the way, are ambiverts. I'm an ambivert. I would say that 85% of people who take our personality quiz end up being ambiverts. It means that in certain situations you're very extroverted, in certain situations you're introverted, that you need refuel time, that you can be very extroverted as long as you have the right scenario, the right situation. So what I would say with leaders who are either introverts, ambiverts, or extroverts is to figure out where are the locations that, the people in the locations that fuel you, and which are the locations and people that tax you. So for example, everyone has a unique brand of charisma, right? Charisma is a warmth and competence, but we all are very unique in that, right? Like someone could be a bubbly, charismatic person. They're very chatty, very talkative, gregarious. They like making people laugh. Whereas you might have someone who's a quietly powerfully charismatic, where they're observers. They come in the room, they're intense listeners, they take in everyone, and when they speak very carefully, and what they say is very weighted. Those are both highly charismatic people, but very different on the extroversion scale. So what you want to think about is, what is your unique brand of charisma? For me, I get very overwhelmed in loud environments with lots of people. I totally shut down. That is very taxing for me. I know that my sort of brand of charisma is very deep one-on-one conversations. I love to ask interesting questions, hard questions, go off social script. That is, I think, where I have the most fun, where I get refueled, where I make the best connections. That means that loud networking events, nightclubs, bars, and concerts are not for me. I cannot go to those events and be comfortable and be charismatic. I'm the opposite. I'm very, very introverted, very awkward. Whereas coffee shops, one-on-one meetings, dinner parties, learning events like conferences, I love it. That works for me really, really well. And so I build my business and my leadership abilities around where I know I thrive, where I can be fueled. So I would think about, how do you like to connect with people? What is your leadership style? And second, where does that happen? Where do you feel like you're your best self? It is impossible to try to be a good leader, read microexpressions, use vocal power, if you're in an environment that makes you uncomfortable. So set yourself up for success by picking places to practice these skills in where you already know you have a leg up on the situation. That's the best way that we can harness our introversion and our extroversion, as opposed to trying to change it. We cannot change typically our personality traits. So most of our personality is genetic, not all of it. It's different for each trait. For example, and I don't remember these numbers exactly, but I think it's something like 35 to 50% of our extroversion is genetic. So it's coded. Then a lot of it comes with, so part of it is the nature, and then some of it is the nurture, how we grew up. So for someone to say, for an extrovert to try to teach an introvert to just be more bubbly, get out there more, or the worst piece of business advice I've ever heard, which is say yes to everything. That is a terrible piece of advice. If you say yes to everything, that means you're putting yourself in situations where you're not thriving. So of course it's going to be harder to connect. So I would say, instead of trying to adapt to something that you're not, which is very inauthentic, instead optimize for what you are. And that is a way of honoring who you are, and as well as showing up as being more authentic. Sorry, I get really passionate about that topic. Sorry if I was yelling.
Right, no, that was a great question. Great question. So we have an alumna here who finds herself putting out a very strong, competent vibe, but then it's to the detriment of cutting off her innately warm and caring personality. So as a woman, how do you balance being competent but not too cold?
Yeah. So that's, first of all, huge, huge kudos on noticing that. So it's very, very hard to self-diagnose where you fall on that scale. So the fact that you already know that you fall a little higher on the competent side, and that people might find that a little bit hard or a little bit intimidating, already gets you leaps and bounds ahead. What I would say is that most likely people who are very highly competent, a lot of the CEOs, C-suite managers that I work with who fall high on competence, what happens is they want to be productive and efficient. And so their productive efficiency gets wrapped up into that competence, where it's very hard to be warm because they want to get stuff done. And so that can sometimes sacrifice feelings. So what I would say is that build in time to have the warm and fuzzy warmth side, as well as the productive, I won't say cold, but productive, competent, productive part. So for example, if you have meetings or coffee shop get-togethers or employee reviews, know that in your head, the first 20 minutes, you've blocked it off. That is rapport building. It's chit-chat. It's talking about family. It's asking about their vacations. You are not going into productive mode just yet. It's all about building the warmth. That's where you're reading micro-expressions. That's where you're having that nice handshake. You're leaning in closer. You're talking about topics that are more personal. And then you can verbally say that you're switching, right? So you can say, oh, it's been so great catching up. Are you ready to sort of dive into this project? That gives you permission to really push forward on that productive efficiency side. So I tend to lean a little heavier on that side as well. So with my employees, I have a team of 6 people who work with me in my lab, and then we have 76 trainers around the world who teach exactly what I teach. And so I know this is a problem when I do my trainings and our board calls and our office calls. So that is exactly what I do, is I'll say, let's just catch up for the first little bit. I want to hear what everyone's doing. Let's do an icebreaker. And then once we're sort of ready, I will say, all right, is everyone ready to sort of barrel forward? And you'll see that people will be like, yep, I'm ready. Even my highly warm people, it's like they are like, okay, I'm gearing up. I'm going to that side of the spectrum. So being very transparent about that and setting aside time for where you want to really focus on the warmth, because otherwise it can be really hard to do that when you're just trying to get stuff done.
All right, and what resources or trainings would you recommend for people who are about to move into a leadership position?
Oh my gosh, there's so many good books. If you're moving into a leadership position, I would actually recommend doing a taste test first. And what I mean by that is there are so many experts out there. There are so many authors. There are so many different perspectives on leadership, and not all of them are going to resonate with you. So what I would recommend doing is doing a taste test to find sort of your preferred method. Do you prefer the scientific approach? Do you prefer like the academic scientific approach? You know, that would be sort of more of a Simon Sinek, Warren Bennis, right? Or do you prefer more of the touchy-feely approach, more on the warm side? So what I would do is I would get a couple of Harvard Business Review books. Harvard Business Review has an amazing book on leadership. They have some on employee engagement. And what's nice about those is the books themselves have chapters by all these different experts. So I would read a couple of those and figure out which chapters resonate with you the most. And almost every single one of those authors has a book. So for example, you'll read a chapter by someone and say, oh my gosh, you know, this chapter is amazing. I'm going to go buy his or her book. So Taste Test with Harvard Business Review, they have a great range of skills and perspectives on leadership, and then go read their book for more in-depth. And you can do the same thing with TED. So TED.com, obviously they curate the best speakers around the world. Go on TED, search leadership. Those two talks that I mentioned will come up, Simon Sinek's and Fields Wicker-Murin. Watch a couple of those TED Talks and then go buy their book, because most of those TED speakers, especially the viral ones, have their own books. That way you're sort of able to find, I won't say your guru, but your mentor, your role model, because I think that the hardest part about leadership is that the principles might be sort of the same over the centuries, but the way that they're delivered is different. Whether you're a Dale Carnegie person or a Sheryl Sandberg person or a Simon Sinek person, they all have very, very different leadership perspectives. And that's going to be really important for you to find your right fit.
All right, wonderful. And before we close out, Vanessa, how long should we expect this to take as we're trying to change or unlearn some of our past behaviors that were hurting our leadership style?
So it very much depends on your muscle memory. So think about how long it took you to learn how to ride a bike. Or, for example, if you were trying to write with your non-dominant hand, how long would it take you to get comfortable? Because the brain is a muscle, it's actually a very similar process. So if you're a fast learner, especially you tend to pick things up really quickly, it will probably be a couple of days, if not a week. If you're a little bit of a slow learner or you like to really try things out, think of Yuval Love's brain scans, right? That brain scan went from very damaged to almost completely whole within 3 months. So I would say it depends on muscle memory, and the more that you practice it, the better it will get. That's one of the reasons why I put so many videos up on our YouTube channel, is because if you want to practice or get more little kind of tidbits of resources, a lot of people will watch the videos at lunch every day or at dinner every day, or they'll listen to the audio version of our videos while they're drive. That can be a really easy way to just sort of have that everyday practice so that you can do it.
All right, and last question that was just submitted, what is social gazing?
Oh, so social gazing is when we, and actually I have a video of this on my YouTube channel, it's when the gaze drops a little bit lower on the face. So it's when you're gazing at someone and you're sending off social signals as opposed to power signals. So power signals, the gaze for leaders typically falls a little bit higher, whereas social signals falls a little bit lower. That's a way of encoding to someone. It's not really a quick question or a quick answer, but I do have that on my YouTube channel. If you, I can actually tweet out that video right now. So after this webinar, I'll put on my Twitter the link to that video if you want to watch it. My Twitter is @VVanEdwards.
All right, @VVanEdwards. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today, Vanessa. Thank you all. You'll be receiving an email with next steps and ways to continue learning from the Alumni Association and Vanessa. So thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.